Let's talk about austerity. Somebody tell me, I'm going to Krishna.com. Did we talk about austerity yet? Does anyone remember? Ashley likes austerity. Atmananda really likes austerity. We have to change his name. Tapasya Das. My favorite thing. Okay. We didn't talk about austerity. All right. So, I guess I'm a bit off here in my manual. Why austerity came up. Austerity is an interesting topic. I guess I accidentally must have skipped it. Austerity is an interesting topic because austerity is meant to please Krishna, and of course it's meant to help us make spiritual advancement, but it's meant to please Krishna. We don't want to make, I don't know, this sounds funny, but we don't want to make spiritual advancement if we're not pleasing Krishna. I mean, there's a concept of becoming more renounced, but not necessarily becoming more pleasing to Krishna. So we don't do austerity for the sake of austerity, but we do austerities that will be pleasing to Krishna, that Krishna wants us to do. And if, for example, you did an austerity which in and of itself was a sacrifice, but it wasn't something Krishna wanted you to do, then don't do it. Because if it's not pleasing to Krishna, or it's not pleasing to Guru, we don't do it, because that's the principle of bhakti. There's another aspect of austerity which we have to be aware of, at least. And then Prabhupada explains, I believe it's in Nectar of Devotion, that austerity can make a person proud, and it can make a person's can make a person's heart hard. Now, let's say I do some austerity and I become proud that the fact that I'm so disciplined, or whatever it is I did, I'm proud of, then what's the point? That austerity won't be purifying me. Or if I do austerity in such a way that my heart's not softening in Krishna consciousness, then it has the opposite effect. So there's a verse, I believe it's a Narada Pancharatra, and Narada Muni says, what is the use of austerity if it's not pleasing to Krishna? And what is the use of, and if you're pleasing Krishna, then what is the use of austerity? So that verse gets you off the hook for all austerity. Because if you're pleasing Krishna, why do you need austerity? And if you're doing austerity that's not pleasing Krishna, you don't need it. So what did Narada Muni mean? Well, there's austerity which is not in devotional service per se, or not helpful, and there's austerity which is. So the principle obviously is we accept things which are favorable. But just for the sake of austerity, that's not why we do it. So you did the austerity, but it didn't help your bhakti. So Narada Muni is saying, well, what's the point of that? And if you have bhakti, then he's saying, well, what's the point of austerity? Because you already have achieved the goal. So I told that story once where some devotee ran to meet Prabhupada on a morning walk, and he was in a rush. He couldn't find his shoes, so he just came walking barefoot, and Prabhupada said, there's already enough austerity in devotional service, don't make it more austere. So it wasn't that, Prabhupada was happy just that we did austerity, but if it was austerity in relation, particularly in relation to spreading Krishna consciousness, then he was happy. But austerity in relation to spreading Krishna consciousness is not necessarily the kind of what one would think to be a normal austerity. It may be a mental austerity that you have to deal with people who are inconsiderate or blasphemous or critical. or just they're not cultured and you have to be with them and deal with them, or they're just ignorant. And so that's a kind of austerity. Or you have to deal with all kinds of management issues or managing different people. That's an austerity. Or you have to give up some regulation to travel, to do some service. That's an austerity. Or you may have to sacrifice some of your morning program to take care of some phone calls with someone in another part of the world. That's an austerity. So it's not just that there's physical austerities like reducing sleep and reducing eating, but these things were really considered in Prabhupada's books often bigger austerities. And sometimes Prabhupada said that preaching and pushing on Krishna consciousness, that's really the greatest austerity. So then you might see a preacher who's doing the austerity of preaching in their personal life, maybe not so austere, and you might think, well, what's going on here? But that's not so important. You sleep on the floor, sleep on a bed, eat 1 chapati, 2 chapatis. If you eat 25 chapatis, yeah, okay, that's different. But you understand the principle that a person's, he's making or she's making this huge sacrifice to spread Krishna consciousness. That's the real austerity. That's what Prabhupada saw to be the real austerity, or the austerity we must focus on. And that is pleasing to Krishna. So that's the principle. So let's read what they say. A devotee's sadhana must include some basic austerities, like rising early in the morning, bathing in cool water when you wake up. You don't have to bathe in cool water all the time, but in the morning. Regulation of food and drink. For devotees, our austerity generally is that we eat our meals at mealtime, and we don't really eat in between meals, generally. And we eat prasadam, not just anything. Regulation of one's association, minimizing bodily comforts and possessions. You know what's really a good austerity, or what we could consider an austerity? If there's something that you like a lot, but it doesn't really have direct relation to serving Krishna, and you give that up, that's an austerity. Yes? I have to sit up in my chair. Hold on a second, everyone. I'm falling over in this chair. Okay. That's a great austerity if you give up something that you're attached to. Right, Vainarati? Give up something you're attached to that you really like. Audio is very low. Hold on. Let me see why. Shouldn't be low. Oh my God. Shouldn't be low, but I can turn it up. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare. Better now, right? Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Now it's not low at all. Yeah. So that was your austerity that you had to hear me speak low. Yeah. Great, do austerities like going to Mexico City. But if you have something and you're attached to it and you really like it, you have something you're attached to, you really like it, but it's not really something that's helping you in Krishna consciousness, it's not helping other people in Krishna consciousness, it's not favorable for devotional service, giving it up, that's a huge austerity. So that's another way for us to look at austerity, that it's something that we're attached to, but we're willing to give it up because it's not helping us in Krishna consciousness. And we're willing to give it up because it'll be pleasing to Krishna. If you can't give it up, the austerity then is to use it only for Krishna and not for sense gratification. And some things You can't really do that. It's just, they're meant for sense gratification and they're not meant for Krishna. And so giving those up is an austerity. So again, it goes back to the point of what's the austerity that's pleasing to Krishna? Just like you could say, well, I'm going to go for a walk and I won't wear any shoes because that's austere. But is that really going to please Krishna? So you go for a walk, you're chanting your rounds and your feet hurt. But you're doing this austerity and the whole time you're thinking of how your feet hurt and you can't hear your rounds. Right? Where's Anuradha? She's like lost on, I just saw her on Skype. I have to tell her to Anuradha. Maybe she's on Mayapurti. No. She's lost in cyberspace. Okay, bad connection. So, okay, what are the important austerities? I have an austerity that most people haven't thought of. And one of the biggest overlooked austerities, we don't consider an austerity, is to listen to the Maha Mantra when you chant. That's a huge austerity. Because it's difficult to control the mind, and that's an overlooked austerity. Don't eat too much. That's an austerity. Don't criticize. That's an austerity, especially if you like criticizing, then to not criticize is difficult for you. It's a sacrifice. It's a discipline. Right? Rising early is a very important austerity. "16 rounds is an important austerity. Austerity of speech is to speak what is truthful, what is pleasing, and not speak things that are agitating. So any time we're controlling any one of our senses in a way that helps us in devotional service, that's an austerity, especially if we have a tendency to use that sense for something other than Krishna. So there's another thing also which is quite interesting, is that when you advance in Krishna consciousness, and something that was austere or considered an austerity is not an austerity anymore. Full fast on Ekadasi, yeah. So maybe controlling your mind while you're chanting is an austerity, but when you become Krishna conscious, it's not austerity. Or let's say you don't like doing something in Krishna consciousness. Maybe Kush doesn't like deity worship, or maybe she does, but if she didn't, then she would say doing deity worship is an austerity. And someone who likes deity worship would say, no, it's not an austerity. Well, oftentimes austerity is not objective, it's subjective. You find something difficult, but you do it, so it's an austerity for you. But the concept of austerity is that it gives you power, because it requires self-discipline, that human life is meant for not acting whimsically. So being dharmic means following principles, and it requires austerity to follow principles, and that human beings are meant to do austerity because animals can't. If animals do austerity, it's forced. Austerity is voluntary. So you get a lot of power by doing austerity. And certainly Guru and Krishna are pleased if you do austerity that pleases them. But again, so much of the austerity that pleased Prabhupada and that Prabhupada gave us was in relation to spreading Krishna consciousness. You say, well, I went through a great austerity to publish these books, or I went through a great austerity to distribute these books. That's directly Krishna consciousness. It's not the austerity of getting up early and taking a cold shower, but it's the austerity of pushing forward the movement. It's very pleasing to Prabhupada. So in that action, you're giving up your time, you're giving up something you could do that would be pleasing, and you're doing it to help others. So austerity is self-sacrifice. I could be doing this, but I don't do it. I could say this, but I don't say it. I could look at this, but I don't look at it. I could go here, but I don't. So, and then what we find is when we do austerity, we're actually happier. See, sense gratification looks like happiness, and austerity is pretty much the opposite of sense gratification. So austerity doesn't look like happiness, but I know many devotees who love austerity. They find it relishable. As paradoxical as that sounds, they find austerity relishable, enjoyable, and so forth. So we should look at austerity as something, if we can look at austerity as something pleasing, like I'm going to get up early, this is really sweet. I'm going to focus on chanting, it's really sweet. I'm going to fast on Ekadasi, or I'm going to skip a meal, this is really sweet. Or I'm going to cut down on my sleep tonight, get up early and do something, this is really sweet. And that, or Ashley's saying, I could say something nasty, but I don't. That's sweet. So if we can reorient our consciousness to looking at austerity as something sweet, something desirable, something pleasurable, and looking at sensual pleasure in the opposite way, then that's good, because it's really true. So as devotees advance, they like doing more austerities. It doesn't bother them. And if you're a materialistic person, austerities bother you. You want everything nice, you want everything comfortable. You like everything sensual. But if, like sometimes I joke with devotees that sometimes someone will cook something for me and it doesn't taste good. And eating is enjoyable, but eating something that doesn't taste good is an austerity. So they'll serve me something and it doesn't taste good. And they'll say, how is it? And I say, as Prabhupada said, human life is meant for austerity. That's my comment on the prasadam, that it's so not tasty, it's austere to eat, but there's a side of me that appreciates it. Okay, well, it's simple, it's austere, and that's good for me. So it's not the end of the world that it's not tasty. Okay, well, I have to nourish myself, I have to fill my belly so I don't starve, and I filled it with something nutritious that was not tasty at all. So that's a good austerity. Not that we go around wanting to taste prasadam, that's not good, or we're not happy if something's offered to Krishna and doesn't taste good. But if by chance we're in a situation and there's some austerity, we can think that way and say, well, austerity is good, austerity is purifying, so let me accept it for tonight or for today. I mean, if it's the rest of my life like that, it may be intolerable, but temporarily for a meal or an evening or something, there's some little austerity. Okay, let me accept it in Krishna's service. That's good, that's purifying. So that way we become more tolerant when things aren't exactly the way we like it. We say, well, it's not exactly the way I like it. This is the situation I'm in now, so I accept this situation as an austerity, and that I'm okay with it. If we see the value of austerity, then difficult situations we can be okay with, just accepting that, well, this is good. If I'm missing something that is enjoyable, then it's good for my Krishna consciousness. Well, you say nice even if it's not nice. I decided today not to do that. You know why? Because if that same cook is going to cook for me every day and they don't know that I don't like it, then I have to tell them, no, cook it this way. Otherwise, at the end of a week, they'll say, did you like my cooking? And I'll say, well, you could have done it this way. And they'll say, why didn't you tell me? So in a nice way sometimes. Like, well, when you cook it this way, it'd be nicer if you, why don't you try next time, put some of this in or put some of that in. Anyway, I used to do that with my mother. She became a good cook by my feedback, so that's my habit. But yes, Ashley, sometimes we have to be nice. If it's only one meal, but if you're staying at their house and you're eating every day, they would probably appreciate knowing what pleases you, don't you think? Okay. I think so. Okay, let's go back and read. Oh, I'm so tired. I hope I don't put you all to sleep. An important austerity for devotees is to fast on certain specified days, like Ekadasi, on important festivals and disappearance days. Now, there's something really interesting going on in ISKCON. Would you like to hear the juicy gossip about ISKCON? Yeah, and everyone's awake. I'm awake. Yeah, let's talk about ISKCON. It's so exciting. What's going wrong now in ISKCON? Yeah, let's talk about it. Love it. So, Hare Krishna. Do I tell my wife? Sometimes. But she just wants to know, what I like to eat, so it's not really a criticism. But 95% of the time, everything she makes is perfect. So one day she put salt in twice, so I had to tell her that I couldn't eat it because it was too salty. So we have a standard. Gaur Purnima, we fast until the evening. Janmashtami, we fast until midnight. Like that, different fast days. No, not about anybody falling down, but so many devotees don't follow that fasting schedule anymore. And it was like, when Prabhupada was here, we'd strictly follow all the fasts. But now, Janmashtami, so many people are eating before midnight and this and that, which never happened. So it's kind of like, I don't know how it happened or the culture happened. Now, Prabhupada did say, if you can't fast all day, you could take fruit or milk, I think he said. Now, it's true, some people have bodies that if they fast, they get dizzy. And they really don't do well if they fast. And they kind of collapse. So, in those cases, as Prabhupada's saying, if you need something, then try to keep it simple, fruit, milk, just keep you going. And then when the feast comes, then you fast. So that's as much ISKCON gossip as you're going to get, Ashley. That's just an observation that, I don't know when the transition took place, but previously we rigidly follow all fasting days. And now I see that's not as rigidly followed. So fasting is good, it pleases Krishna. Atmananda knows that. But especially fasting on holidays, it's very important. Okay. Now, as far as Ekadasi fasting, you can just take milk and fruit, you could take nothing, you could just take water, or you can take anything but grains and beans. Prabhupada himself did not follow so strictly. He just didn't eat grains and beans on Ekadasi. He didn't. For some reason, he didn't push us to follow anything more austere, but when it came up to him that some devotees are fasting, like Atmananda, Prabhupada said, fasting is good, as long as you can function. normally, then fasting is good as long as you have energy and you can do your service. But he would say, if you can't do your service, then don't fast. Now, we have this story that Prabhupada told us within the Gaudiya Math that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta gave more importance to preaching than any other kind of austerity. So if some preacher was fasting on Ekadasi, for example, and didn't have the energy to preach, then he would say then he should eat so he can go out and preach. That was considered the greatest austerity in the sense it was most pleasing to Krishna. So I always have to keep that in mind. So, we're not doing austerity for austerity's sake. We're doing it to please Krishna. And if your spiritual master wants you to go out and spread Krishna consciousness and you can't because you're fasting, then that fasting's not pleasing Krishna. So it goes back to my original point that austerity is not always objective. It's within a context of options. And sometimes other options are more important than what appears to be the greatest austerity. So here's a good case of that. I've told this other story many times. It's an amazing story where a devotee did the austerity of doing Ganga Parikrama, which means walking around the entire Ganga, which I don't know how long that takes, but it probably took a year or something. And that's an austerity. But Bhaktisiddhanta didn't want him to do it, but he did it anyway. Because he was attached to doing it for some reason. And Bhaktisiddhanta was very upset. So we were told when he came back, he was a sannyasi, he took away his sannyas for disobeying that order. And then I told another story once that Shrutikirti tells that he was Prabhupada's personal servant, and that meant massaging Prabhupada, cooking, taking care of just anything personal that Prabhupada needed. And when they were in Los Angeles, he was observing so many devotees going out of book distribution and how blissful they were and so on. And he asked Prabhupada if he could go out. He felt that he wasn't maybe pleasing Prabhupada. So he wanted to go out on book distribution. And Prabhupada said, you could go, but without my blessings. Because Prabhupada needed him to serve. So he wasn't going to give his blessings, because if he goes on book distribution, then there won't be anyone to take care of his personal things. So that's another important point. So we know how important book distribution is, and we know how pleasing it is to Prabhupada. But Prabhupada needed a particular service. And so if that devotee went out and did the austerity of book distribution, it wouldn't have been pleasing to Prabhupada. So the value of that austerity would have been that it would have hurt his devotional service, being that it wasn't pleasing to Prabhupada. So that's important to understand. So now, as far as Ekadasi is concerned, the main reason we follow Ekadasi is it's an auspicious day. It's not inauspicious. And you can make more advancement on that day, so it's auspicious to do more hearing and chanting. So we minimize other bodily necessities to do hearing and chanting. So for example, it said, Ekadasi is like a Sabbath. So it said you shouldn't shave on Ekadasi and you shouldn't cut your fingernails. And you should minimize eating and minimize sleeping. In other words, anything dealing with the body, try to minimize. That's the principle. If you're in the professional world, you'll have to shave or cut your fingernails and so on. But you understand the principle. It's an auspicious day for hearing and chanting, and in Prabhupada's often recommended, or we've heard, and we used to do this in the early days of the movement. Every Ekadasi we would chant 25 rounds. Just increase your hearing and chanting. So the real benefit of Ekadasi, or the real austerity, is to increase your hearing and chanting. So I'm going to go to Krishna.com, see if there's any comments, questions, and so forth. So Amananda is giving us advice on how to do a full fast, gradually. training to gradually do a full fast. He's very used to doing it. He likes to do it. He does it quite often. Kush is asking, are we supposed to do Ekadasi prasadam for Vishnu Tattva appearance days? Yes. Maybe not all temples do it. That means when we break the fast, we have Ekadasi. We don't eat grains. That's the standard. Amananda says you can get sick fasting if you're not used to it. You can. I think also, after you've fasted for a day, your first meal needs to be light, otherwise you could get sick, So the problem is that we do these full day fasts and then we go into feasts, and it's not really healthy. I have a hard time with that. Going on a full day fast and then having a feast. I don't digest it well. So Ashley says, I used to openly not fast during fast days in the temple. Now I'm careful and shy and will follow. Wow. Ashley fasts all day until the next morning on Ekadasi. Interesting. I mean on Janmashtami. Prabhupada's appearance day, but you should take prasadam at noon because that's service. So prasadam comes, it should be taken. In other words, the principle is when there's a Mahaprasad, like it's Prabhupada's appearance day, so then we're feasting and we should honor that. That he would be pleased. 3 types of fasting. Prabhupada didn't stress Ekadasi, no. Why he didn't stress it? Again, because he was just stressing preaching as the real austerity. Sinking down to my seat again, everyone. Let me adjust the camera. If I sink down anymore, I might fall asleep in the lecture. And that would be embarrassing, wouldn't it? Yeah, so Prabhupada's focus was on preaching. So he didn't he didn't discourage fasting, but he really focused on the austerity of preaching. And we could guess that he didn't want, he didn't want to make people feel bad who couldn't fast by saying everyone has to. So he had a general principle that fasting is good if you can do it. But the minimum fasting was all he gave us. Personally, he also didn't follow it. I guess he didn't think it was that important, As we said, eat, take prasadam, and go preach. But as she's saying, she can hear and talk to Krishna when she does austerity. Yeah, when you don't eat, your body becomes very calm. Your mind senses really calm down. It saves time. You have more energy. And then you have Sabbath, yeah. But I never followed the Sabbath. Ekadasi is our Sabbath. Yeah, Prabhupada would do half-fast. Yeah, he would. Whatever he instructed us to do, he would do. So appearance days are usually, of acharyas are half-day fasts. Yeah. Not only that, Prem Kishore, not only that austerity is preaching, it's the greatest austerity. Yeah. So, again, we go back to this point of what's pleasing to Krishna. That's what we want to do, right? So, any austerity that's pleasing, the most pleasing to Krishna, that's what we want to do. Okay, let's see. Okay. Okay, you break Ekadasi. Excuse me. You break Ekadasi the next day, and it's called Dwadasi. And there are certain times you're supposed to break it with grains, Atmananda, the next day. Between certain hours, which you get on the calendar, Otherwise, the Ekadasi is not successful. Now here they say, ours is a preaching mission, and if complete fasting impedes our service or preaching, it should not be followed. Consume what you need. Now, Bhima Ekadasi, when's Bhima Ekadasi coming up? Soon? In May? Where am I going to be somewhere? And that's the Ekadasi that Krishna gave to Bhima. Bhima had missed other Ekadasis. So he gave it to Bhima and said, if you follow this Ekadasi, then if you've missed any other Ekadasis, then by following this Ekadasi, you're good. It can't, your slate is clean, basically. Okay. Then they talk about Chaturmasya. It's 4 months, what we call the rainy season, and Chaturmasya means 4 months. And traditionally, the sadhus during the rainy season didn't travel because of the rain, so they would stay in one place. And because their travel was their austerity, then they would voluntarily do austerities and they would avoid certain foods. So 1 month they would avoid green leafy vegetables, 1 month yogurt, 1 month milk, and 1 month urd dal. So we also follow that. Of course, you have to be aware of when the month is and what to not eat. And what is a green leafy vegetable? I think in India it was a particular vegetable that grew everywhere that they liked and they didn't eat it. Of course, if you don't drink milk anyway, it's not an austerity to not drink it. If you don't take green leafy vegetables anyway, it's not really an austerity. But following in this system, we do it. Okay, so now they've gone to another section. So, are there any questions on this? It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Questions, answers. Okay, what if you miss the breakfast? If you don't break fast on time from the Ekadasi, you don't get the benefit of the Ekadasi. 9th June. Oh yeah, Kush and I were talking about that, 9th June. I might be in South Africa, doing austerity with Kush. What if you miss the breakfast? Then apparently you don't get the benefit of the Ekadasi unless you break it between the hours that are designated for your particular time zone. What happens? Well, we're devotees, so ultimately we're engaged in devotional service. Krishna protects us from sinful reactions and so forth. But as far as possible, we want to follow these principles. Ashi says, not fasting on Ekadasi is like killing your own spiritual master, father and mother and whole generation. Now, I'll tell you something interesting, Ashley. Because Prabhupada was not entirely strict about these things. But he was strict, but not to the degree that this verse would make us think we need to be. When now in our movement, Ekadasis are calculated based on what part of the world you're in. So Kush may be having Ekadasi on June 9th. In America, you may be having it on June 10th or June 8th. But initially, we always followed Ekadasi based on Mayapur. So whenever it was Ekadasi in Mayapur, then the whole movement followed. Later on, devotees who got into astrology and so forth said, wait a minute, that's Ekadasi there, but it's not Ekadasi here. So then we started this system. So now what that means is for so many years, in our devotional life, there were probably many times we followed Ekadasi on the wrong day, technically. Okay, so now what? You followed Ekadasi on the wrong day. That means you were eating grains on Ekadasi and following Ekadasi on another day. So what does that mean? Another thing is that oftentimes, aside from not following the Ekadasis being Mayapur time, another thing was that sometimes Prabhupada, devotees would be traveling with Prabhupada and they forgot to follow Ekadasi. I think maybe they weren't informed, or they didn't inform Prabhupada, or maybe they were somewhere else and they didn't follow it. But there were cases when Prabhupada was not informed and they ate grains on Ekadasi. And then Prabhupada would say, okay, follow it the next day. So the next day we do the austerity of not eating grains. And then you might say, well, how can you just be arbitrary about when to follow Ekadasi? Because if the next day wasn't Ekadasi, then what's the point? But that's what Prabhupada did. So we could see that he took a principle, okay, this is an austerity, and we will do it, but not necessarily. He didn't say, well, we missed it this time, so next time, all we can do is follow it next time. But he said, no, do it tomorrow. That's interesting, isn't it? Because it shows that Prabhupada was not fanatical about it if these things happened. And as I said before, by following it on Mayapur time, that means we probably missed so many of the actual days for so many years. Okay. Vrindavani, during traveling, should we do Ekadasi? Well, ideally you shouldn't travel on Ekadasi. But you always follow Ekadasi wherever you are. No matter what, no matter how difficult it is. So, Anuradha says, aka Alejandra, why don't you put in your new name? Anuradha, like all the others have done. You have such a nice name. You can, if you need to sell grains and serve grains on Ekadasi, you can. If that's what you have to do, just don't eat them. And some devotees say on Ekadasi you shouldn't even see grains, but as far as I remember, Prabhupada let us serve grains on Ekadasi. If you can make something that's Ekadasi proof, that would be better. Where can I find out about the months we have to avoid certain things? Okay. When does it start? It's called, well, you should, if you go to the Vaishnava calendar website and then you sign up and tell them you're in Mexico, then they'll send you all the holidays, and that's one of the things they'll send you, and they'll tell you what not to eat. I think it's called Vaishnava calendar, as far as I know. Why don't you check it out, Atmanand, and let us know. Chris says, I was told that breakfast could be any time from sunrise. Well, if you get the Vaishnava calendar, they'll tell you the exact times. It's different every Dwadasi is different. If you miss one day, can you do the next day? That's what Prabhupada did, yes. I have been a killer too much times. What does that mean? Missed Ekadasi? Get on the Vaishnava calendar website and sign up, and you'll get emails. So that way. What if we have small kids? We have to make grains for them? No. What you need is fasting flour. I should bring back some fasting flour. No, you just make a lot of potatoes. Ekadasi is a little austere because sometimes it's inconvenient. But we follow it. It's just the austerity of being a devotee. In the West, we follow it. You know, often, like we're seeing here, often austerity just means you're making some sacrifice. Right? Something like that. Yes? Vainarati is saying she missed 4 Ekadasis since she moved out of the temple. Maybe they need an Ekadasi app. It just lands up on your phone. But Vaishnava calendar, did you check it out, Atmananda, the Vaishnava calendar website? So you can tell us about it. Well, Atmananda Das. Your name is Atmananda Das. In Bengali, Bangla, they say Das. Your name is Atmananda Das. That's how they would say Atmananda Das. Atmananda Das is asking about a demon in the grains. Well, Lord Chaitanya told his mother, don't eat grains on Ekadasi. And the story that is there in Shastra is that Vishnu felt compassion upon all the people in hell, and to liberate them, he said, on this day all sins will go into the grains, and the one who doesn't eat grains will become free from sin. So it was a special day. Okay, there we have the website address. So if you go on, you can sign up. And then when you sign up, I assume, you put in where you live, and then you'll get emails on every single holiday. Not only Ekadasis, but appearance days, disappearance days. Yeah, Kush gets them, I get them. So then you'll know when Chaturmasya comes up. It must start in June or something. Yes. Wow, I stayed awake for an hour. That's amazing. I'm so tired. I don't know how I did it. And one more hour I have to give a class. Oh, Krishna. Life is difficult. I think I have to go in the intensive unit care ward after I got worked hard here also. Got worked hard in Mexico and got worked hard in Seattle. They're just working me hard wherever I go. Yeah. So, another nice Ekadasi story. Prabhupada had asked that we do more hearing chanting on Ekadasi, so one of the leaders of the huge Sankirtan party said, well, should all the devotees stay back on Ekadasi and chant more rounds? And Prabhupada said, no, they should go out and preach. He said, if let's say you're a pujari and you have free time, then you chant more. He said, but for those who are going out and preaching, that's the most important. So again, Prabhupada put preaching as a greater austerity than anything. So he didn't feel that it was necessary that they stay back and chant more rounds. I mean, that may be something they could work into their schedule, but he felt the most important thing was to preach. We don't want to minimize Ekadasi, and we don't want to minimize other austerities, but this was Prabhupada's response. No, that the people who are staying back, they can chant more, but the people who are going out, that's different. Right? I should get some rest, yeah. We've got 3 minutes, and then I can disappear. But I rested last night, but it didn't work. So, I think one of the conclusions we can come to from this class is that as we advance, I think one of the symptoms of advancement is that when we look at austerity, we won't look at it like, oh, austerity means less sense gratification. I don't like austerity. But rather we'll look at it as austerity means less sense gratification. I like austerity. That's good. I'm getting less sense gratification means more time and energy and focus on Krishna's service. That's good. I like that. It makes me feel good. I like making these sacrifices. You understand the principle? That naturally for a materialistic person, austerity is not pleasing. I mean, unless you're going to become successful at something, or powerful, famous, wealthy. But austerity for loving God, no. Giving up sense gratification. They may give up sense gratification, but it's only temporary because they're giving up now to get more later. So, it's austerity right now for me to stay awake. You know, another question you could ask, which I'm surprised nobody did, was, well, it seems like non-devotees are more austere often than devotees, and they may be. But why are they doing the austerity? So they can get sense gratification. So it's not really austerity. Right? Isn't it? He gets up so early and he works so hard, but why is he doing that? So he can get sense gratification. You see? So and as we're advancing, we're coming to this platform where when we don't get sense gratification, we actually feel good, as strange as that seems. When we make sacrifices of sense gratification, we feel blissful, as weird as that would seem from the material perspective. Right? What do you think? Does it make sense? It makes sense if you practice it. Right? So tonight, Atmananda is going to sleep on the floor with no blanket, just to do some austerity, right? See, Atmananda likes austerity. Atmananda tapasya das. Now, I have to respond to Kusha's statement. And she says, I'm not austere. Women generally don't like austerity. They like nice things. They like to be comfortable. That's their nature. But when they live in the temple, when they're young, they still do the austerities. But it doesn't mean that they shouldn't get up. But they really don't like sleeping on floors. Men can tolerate it. And too much severe austerity for most women is not fun, as it can be fun for men. So men, don't force too much austerity on the women. They do their austerity of having children and raising them and the other regular austerities, but it's generally not woman's nature to be austere. So we go back to, well, what are the real austerities? You rise early, you chant your rounds like that. It's, women are softer. It's harder for them to do austerities. Did you know that men's skin is 4 times thicker than women's? There's a saying that being thick-skinned, it means you're tough. So, okay, we're going to end class here. And, okay, the women don't have to do much austerity, but the men have to do austerity. That's the conclusion of the class. I always like to say things to please the women, because it's important to please the women. Having children is not regular, but once you have them, it's regular. And then it's austerity for the rest of your life. An austerity of love, burden of love. All right, everyone. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. We have to say goodbye, and we will see you next time.